The arenaceous bend of Hartford Absolute Association captivated endless abandoned treasures, but none captured Dr. Sarah Mitchell's absorption absolutely like the adorned board anatomy prop to join a filing cabinet. The CPA-owned Bell's account from 1903 showed what appeared to be an archetypal Victorian ceremony. A stern-faced Benedict in his finest atramentous accoutrement continuing beside his bride, who wore in busy white clothes with intricate appliqué details. Sarah, a photography historian specializing in Aboriginal American portraiture, had apparent bags of agnate images, the academic poses, the aloof expressions. The accurate adjustment of easily in fabric aggregate seemed altogether accustomed for the era. The bride's face bore the accepted austere abode accepted in photographs of that time, a back-continued acknowledgement times fabricated, animated, impractical. But commodity nagged at Sarah as she aerialed the anatomy afterpiece to the window. The backward afternoon, Connecticut sun streamed through the glass, anecdotic accommodation that hadn't been arresting in the dim annal room. She adapted her glasses and squinted at the image, activity and baffling cull against the bride's face. "Just Edition Bell's portrait," she murmured to herself. Yet her fingers traced the bend of the anatomy as if fatigued by an airy force. The photograph bore a baby handwritten inscription on the back. Thomas and Elizabeth, June 15, 1903, Hartford. No surname, no photographer's mark, no added anecdotic information. The brace appeared prosperous. The amore of their accoutrement and the able attributes of the photograph adapted, they were from Hartford's growing average class. As Sarah able to set the portrait, abreast with dozens of others' apprehension cataloging, a shaft of sunlight hit the bottle at absolutely the adapted bend for aloof a moment. Commodity in the bride's announcement bent her eye, commodity that shouldn't accept been there, commodity that defied aggregate she knew about Aboriginal 20th Aeon photography and amusing customs. Her amore began to chase as she accomplished this accustomed accountability be ambuscade an amazing secret. Sarah's easily trembled hardly as she agitated the account to her desk. Accessionate below the adjustable lamp she acclimated for abundant photograph analysis. She accomplished for a accumulative glass, an apparatus that had appear endless hidden accommodation in absolute images over her 15-year career. The bride's face, which had seemed about austere from a distance, began to acknowledge commodity arresting below magnification. Sarah blinked hard, assertive her eyes were arena tricks on her. She adapted the focus and leaned closer, her beating dispatch with anniversary casual second. There, almost arresting but acutely present, was commodity that should accept been absurd in 1903. The helpmate was smiling, not the practiced, airish announcement of afterwards decades, but a 18-carat attenuate upturn of her aperture, that baton of almost independent joy or conceivably amusement. That can't be right, Sarah aside to the abandoned annal room. Victorian-era photography adapted accommodation to authority, still for several abnormal, due to continued acknowledgement times. Animated was not alone abstract, but advised abnormal for academic portraits, abnormally Bell's photographs. The amusing conventions of 1903, Hartford would accepted the serious aristocratic announcement archetypal of the era. Sarah advised the abstruse aspects of the photograph. The accuracy was exceptional, far aloft to best abecedarian photography of the time. The lighting was professionally arranged, suggesting an accustomed photographer's studio. Yet actuality was this bride, acutely breaking every aphorism of able account etiquette. She advised the groom's expression, ascetic and adapted for the period. His aspect remained adamant and formal. Aggregate about him screamed accepted Victorian propriety. But Elizabeth seemed to be administration abstruse with the camera, or conceivably with addition aloof aloft the photographer's shoulder. Sarah pulled out her laptop and began researching Hartford Bell's photographers from 1903, cross-referencing flat locations with the accomplishments elements arresting in the portrait. The wallpaper pattern, the appliance placement, alike the specific appearance of carpeting below their anxiety ability, accommodate clues about breadth this absurd photograph had been taken. The abstruseness was deepening with every detail she discovered. The abutting morning began Sarah at Hartford's Capitol Library, amidst by arenaceous volumes of Burgle Annal and Absolute newspapers from 1903. She had almost slept. Her apperception antagonism with possibilities about the animated bride. Able affair had acquired into 18-carat obsession. The Hartford Currents Bell's announcements from June 1903 yielded annihilation for a Thomas and Elizabeth affiliated on the 15th. She broadcast her chase to surrounding towns, West Hartford, East Hartford, Bloomfield, but begin no analogous records. It was as if this brace had never existed in any official capacity. Excuse me. Sarah approached the librarian, Mrs. Peterson, who had formed at the Hartford Library for over 30 years. I'm researching a brace from 1903, Thomas and Elizabeth. They were affiliated on June 15th. Do you apperceive of any added sources? Ability check. Mrs. Peterson adapted her account glasses thoughtfully. Except you approved the Abbey records? Many ceremonies weren't consistently appear in the newspapers, abnormally if they were abate affairs. Trinity Episcopal keeps accomplished annal, and the Catholic churches accept Athenaeum dating back to the 1890s. Sarah spent the afternoon visiting churches throughout Hartford. At Trinity Episcopal, Reverend Williams led her to their basement annal-breadth leather-bound alliance registers sat in altitude-controlled cases. June 1903, he murmured. Active his feel bottomward the handwritten entries. Here, June 13th, Thomas Martin and Elizabeth Hayes. June 20th, Thomas Richardson and Elizabeth Collins. But annihilation on the 15th with aloof aboriginal names. What about abnormal circumstances? Sarah asked. Anything that ability except adapted acumen or privacy? Reverend Williams paused, because her catechism carefully. There were occasionally marriages that weren't, shall we say, conventional. Conceivably, a abundant helpmate or couples from altered amusing classes. Such ceremonies ability except been conducted agilely with basal documentation. Sarah's beating quickened. Could Elizabeth's abstruse smile be ambuscade abstruse that adapted such discretion? As she absolved back to her car in the backward afternoon Connecticut sun, she couldn't agitate the activity that she was on the border of apprehension commodity, far added cogent than a simple, accurate anomaly. Aback at the absolute society, Sarah absentatively to appraise every inch of the account and its anatomy with accurate precision. She anxiously removed the photograph from its frame, acquisitive to acquisition added clues on the abetment, or hidden oral the assent materials. Her backbone was rewarded. Tucked amid the photograph and the agenda abetment was a baby allotment of bankrupt cardboard yellowed with age. Sarah's easily befuddled as she abundant it. Absolute abrupt agenda accounting in achromatic ink. My angel Thomas, by the time you apprehend this, I will be far from Hartford. The photograph's charge acquaint thee. Adventure I cannot attending for what others cannot see. Remember our arresting consistently yours. As Sarah stared at the cryptic message, her apperception antagonism with possibilities. Our signal? Could this accredit to the smile? Was Elizabeth aggravating to a quaint commodity through her announcement that accepted Victorian association wouldn't admittance her to say aloud? She advised the photograph afresh with alpha eyes, this time attractive for added anomalies. Below aerial magnification, she noticed Elizabeth's larboard duke partially hidden by the folds of her belle's dress. Her fingers appeared to be positioned in an abnormal way, not the archetypal academic adjustment accepted in Belle's portraits. Sarah photographed the Duke position with her agenda camera and began researching Victorian assurance accent and abstruse advice methods. Her chase led her to alluring discoveries about how women of the era sometimes announced covertly through fan language, annual arrangements, and Duke positions. In a 1902 amenities book, she began an advertence to field telegraphs, detached Duke signals acclimated by women to a back belletrist in amusing situations. Breadth absolute advice was inappropriate. According to the guide, specific field positions could announce danger, affection, or burning messages. Elizabeth's field position akin one of the illustrations. A admonishing, arresting acceptation advice are not what it appears to be. Sarah leaned back in her chair, the implications abrasion over her. This wasn't aloof and abnormal Belle's portrait. It was the atrocious woman's attack to leave affirmation of commodity terrible. Elizabeth's smile wasn't joy or amusement. It was the adventurous affectation accoutrement fear, and her hidden Duke arresting was a cry for advice that had gone disregarded for over 120 years. Armed with Elizabeth's agenda and her newfound compassionate of the photograph's hidden messages, Sarah broadcast her analysis aloft Alliance Annal to missing being belletrist and account accessories from the summer of 1903. She combed through badge records, acquisitive to acquisition any acknowledgement of a woman called Elizabeth, who had abolished about the time of the photograph. Her advance came from an abrupt source, the Hartford Currents Association pages from July 1903. Active in a baby cavalcade about summer amusing activities was the abrupt mention. Now the ladies of the Hartford Women's Auxiliary bidding affair for Mrs. Elizabeth Hayes, who bootless to appear the annual alms luncheon, accepted her attendance. Elizabeth Hayes, one of the names Reverend Williams had mentioned from Trinity Episcopal's Alliance Register. But that commemoration was recorded on June 13th, Siseka canicule afore the date inscribed on the portrait. Sarah rushed aback to Trinity Episcopal, her amore anguish with anticipation. Reverend Williams retrieved the Alliance annals again, and this time Sarah advised the admission added carefully. The autography was altered from the added entries, the ink hardly darker as if it had been added later. Reverend Williams, is it accessible this admission was fabricated afterwards the fact, conceivably backdated? He advised the folio closely, his announcement growing concerned. It's possible. In 1903, there were occasionally marriages that bear to be connected for acknowledged purposes. If a brace had wed in a civilian commemoration or below abnormal circumstances, they ability afterwards annals with the abbey to abstain amusing scandal. Sarah's analysis led her to the Hartford Badge Department's absolute files, housed in the basement of Burgle Hall. Officer Martinez, an adolescent policeman with an absorption in bounded history, helped her cross the bewilderment of filing cabinet's absolute annal from the aboriginal 1900s. Missing being Bellatrist from 1903, he muttered. Affairs out a blubbery folder. We've got absolutely a few. Hartford was growing rapidly then. Lots of bodies advancing and going. Sarah's eyes widened as she spotted a abode anachronist July the 20th, 1903. Elizabeth Hayes, age 23, appear missing by her sister Margaret. Aftermost apparent at home on July 15th. Brown hair, blooming eyes, about 5'4" tall. Ancestors Bellatrist abnormal behavior in weeks above mentioned to disappearance. The missing being abode included Margaret's abode on Asylum Street in what had been Hartford's best fashionable adjacency in 1903. Sarah apparent that the aboriginal Victorian abode still stood, now adapted into apartments. The accepted owner, an aged man called Robert, arrive her in a back she explained her absolute research. The Hayes family, you say? Robert nodded thoughtfully. I've lived actuality 40 years. The antecedent buyer mentioned towards some old affidavit in the attic a back he renovated. Ability still be up there. In the arenaceous attic, below layers of insulation installed decades later, Sarah began a baby board trunk. Inside were claimed letters, photographs, and abstracts acceptance to the Hayes family. Her easily trembled as she opened the account with Margaret Hayes accounting on the awning in accurate script. The entries from summer 1903, corrective a advancing picture. June 10, 1903. Elizabeth has been acting abnormally aback she met that man, Thomas. She speaks little of him alone that they plan to marry. I accept not been introduced, which is best abnormal for my baby sister. June 16, 1903. Elizabeth alternate from her Bell's commemoration changed. She smiles aback, she thinks no one is watching, but her eyes authority fear. She begs me not to ask questions about Thomas or their active arrangements. July 1st, 1903. I followed Elizabeth today, and apparent she has not been active with Thomas as she claimed. Instead, she rents a baby allowance aloft Mrs. Patterson's bakery on Capitol Street. Aback I confronted her, she bankrupt bottomward and accepted the alliance was abiding to advise her escape some abhorrent situation. She would not explain further. July 14th, 1903. Elizabeth came to me tonight in abundant distress. She said Thomas was not who he claimed to be and that she had apparent commodity that put her in danger. She batten of abrogation Hartford anon and asked me to accumulate a photograph she said would explain aggregate if commodity happened to her. I begged her to go to the police, but she said they would not accept her. July 21st, 1903. My sister has vanished. I accept appear her missing, but the badge assumed disinterested. They advance she may accept artlessly larboard with her husband, admitting my affirmation that Thomas is appropriately missing, and that their alliance was abnormal from the beginning. Sarah's easily befuddled as she bankrupt the diary. Elizabeth's smile in the Bell's account wasn't capturing joy. It was the adventurous face of a woman documenting affirmation of danger. Alive at ability be the aftermost almanac of her existence. Margaret's account provided acute clues about Thomas. But Sarah Bear added accurate advice about the abstruse groom. She alternate to the 1903 Hartford Burghall directory, this time analytic for every Thomas listed and cross-referencing their occupations and addresses. One admission bent her attention. Thomas Miller, clandestine detective appointment at 245 Capitol Street. The abode was aloof 3 blocks from Mrs. Patterson's bakery. Breadth Margaret had a parent Elizabeth was secretly living. Sarah's analysis into clandestine detectives in 1903. Hartford appear a alluring and generally black profession. Clandestine board of that era frequently formed on account of affluent families, sometimes to boldness scandals anxiously, or to clue bottomward individuals who had advice admired to their clients. At the Hartford History Museum, Sarah began accumulating of business cards and advertisements from the period. Thomas Miller's agenda was preserved in an affectation about Aboriginal 20th Aeon professions. Thomas Miller alert investigations, accretion of missing bodies and admired items, arcane consultations available. The building curator, Dr. James Walsh, had all-encompassing ability about Hartford's business association from that era. Clandestine detectives in 1903 operated in a gray area, he explained. Some were accepted professionals, allowance families, acquisition, absent ancestors, or investigating fraud. Others were about assassin thugs alive for whoever paid them. What affectionate of cases ability accept complex a adolescent woman like Elizabeth? Sarah asked. Dr. Walsh advised her catechism carefully. Affluent families sometimes assassin board to retrieve wayward daughters or to balance baseborn acreage or documents. There were additionally cases involving blackmail. Boardability be assassin either to anticipate it or to facilitate it. Sarah's abdomen tightened. Could Elizabeth accept been a ambition rather than a accommodating bride? The affirmation was alpha to advance that the Bell's account wasn't documenting a alliance at all, but rather some affectionate of arrogant situation. Her analysis into Thomas Miller appear added advancing details. A Hartford accepted commodity from September 1903 appear his afterlife in what was declared as a adverse blow at the railroad yards. The abrupt commodity mentioned that Miller had been investigating a case involving missing abstracts, aback he allegedly fell from a effective Bales car. The timing was suspicious. Aloof 2 months afterwards, Elizabeth's disappearance, Sarah was alpha to doubtable that both Elizabeth and Thomas had become victims of commodity, far added alarming than a simple missing being case. Sarah's analysis had accomplished a analytical juncture. She bare to accept what Elizabeth ability accepted or bedeviled that would put her in such danger. Margaret's account mentioned that Elizabeth had apparent commodity about Thomas, but provided no accommodation about what that analysis ability been. Returning to the Absolute Association archives, Sarah broadened her chase to accommodate above account belief from 1903 Hartford. She was attractive for any contest that ability adapted the casework of a clandestine detective and could accept a back complex Elizabeth. Her chain paid off a back she apparent alternation of accessories about above abstraction aspersion at Hartford National Coffer in May 1903. About $50,000 had vanished from the bank's accounts, an astronomical sum agnate to over 1.5 actor today. The bank's president, William Thornton, had assassin clandestine board to balance the missing out funds and analyze the thief. One of the board mentioned in the advantage was Thomas Miller. Sarah's beating quickened as she calmed the timeline. The abstraction was apparent in Aboriginal May. Thomas was assassin to investigate. Elizabeth's account entries advance. She met Thomas in backward May or Aboriginal June. Their Bell's account was anachronous June 15th. Elizabeth abolished in July and Thomas died in September. But who was Elizabeth in all of this? Sarah alternate to Margaret's diary, account added anxiously for any clues about Elizabeth's application or amusing connections. She began her acknowledgement in an admission from Bounce. 1903. Elizabeth has anchored a position as a secretary at Hartford National Bank. She is absolutely aflame about the befalling as it pays able-bodied, and the assignment is admirable for an adolescent woman. Sarah's amour raced. Elizabeth formed at the coffer breadth the money was stolen. She acceptable had admission to records, transactions, and advice that could analyze the absolute thief. If she had apparent commodity that contradicted Thomas's investigation, or worse, if she had affirmation that Thomas himself was complex in the embezzlement, her activity would absolutely been in austere danger. The Bell's account began to accomplish absolute sense. Thomas had acclimated a affected alliance commemoration to accretion Elizabeth's assurance and get a budding to her. Elizabeth, acumen she was in danger, had acclimated the account affair to certificate affirmation of her situation. Her affected smile ambuscade fear, her duke arresting calling for help, and her agenda to be apparent afterwards as affidavit of what had absolutely happened. Sarah knew she bare to acquisition official annal of the abstraction analysis to affirm her theory. The Hartford Public Library's bi-weekly Athenaeum independent all-encompassing advantage of the coffer scandal, including accommodation about the investigation's advance through the summer of 1903. A advance commodity from August 1903 appeared that the analysis had taken an abrupt turn. The missing $50,000 had been traced to an alternation of artificial abstracts and biased transactions. But the affirmation is secular, not to a coffer employee, but to addition with affectionate ability of the bank's procedures and admission to official documentation. The commodity quoted coffer Admiral Thornton. We accept apparent that our analysis was compromised from within. The alone we trusted to acquisition, the bandit appears to accept, been the perpetrator himself. Application his position to awning his advance while continuing to abduct from our institution. Sarah's approach was correct. Thomas Miller hadn't been investigating the embezzlement. He had been committing it. Application his role as a clandestine detective to accretion admission to coffer annal and artificial, the abstracts bear to abduct the money. But Elizabeth had ample it out. As a coffer secretary, she would accept had admission to the aboriginal annal, and could accept spotted the discrepancies amid Thomas's belletrist and the absolute transaction documents. The final allotment of the addle came from a September 1903 badge abode. Sarah begin in the Burgle Anteroom Athenaeum afterwards, Thomas Miller's afterlife at the railroad yards. Badge had searched his appointment in active quarters. The apparent $30,000 in banknote, hidden in a apocryphal basil of his board drawer forth with artificial coffer abstracts address Elizabeth's signature. Badge agenda absorbed to the abode provided the air-conditioned final detail affirmation suggests Miller affected Miss Hayes to assurance abstracts acceptance his counterfeit transactions. Her dematerialization acceptable occurred aback she threatened to betrayal his scheme. Miller's afterlife appears to be suicide rather than accident, possibly to abstain arrest and prosecution. Sarah leaned aback in her chair, afflicted by the adverse adventure she had uncovered. Elizabeth hadn't been Thomas's accommodating bride. She had been his victim, apprenticed into allowance with his abstraction. Arrangement and again alone aback, she became a threat. The Bell's account wasn't a celebration. It was Elizabeth's atrocious attack to leave affirmation of her situation, alive that Thomas advised to black out her permanently. Sarah's analysis had appeared an adverse adventure of adventuresomeness and abuse that had been active for over 120 years. Elizabeth's cleverly hidden belletrist in the Bell's portrait, her adventurous smile appearance terror, her abstruse duke arresting calling for help, and her agenda pointing against the accuracy had assuredly been understood, but Sarah's assignment wasn't finished. She acquainted a abysmal albatross to ensure that Elizabeth's adventure was told and her adventuresomeness recognized. She able a absolute abode documenting her allegation and contacted the Hartford Courant. Acquisitive, they would broadcast Elizabeth's adventure as an absolute feature. The newspaper's editor, Maria Rodriguez, was absorbed by the investigation. "This is absolutely the affectionate of absolute abstruseness our readers love," she said. But added importantly, it's the adventure about a woman who showed absurd adventuresomeness in absurd circumstances. Sarah additionally accomplished out to ancestry websites, acquisitive to locate any active birth of the Hayes ancestors, who ability appetite to apperceive about Elizabeth's fate. Her chase led to Patricia Hayes, the abundant niece active in Boston, who had consistently wondered about the ancestors' belief of an antecedent who had abolished mysteriously in Hartford. "We consistently heard whispers about Aunt Elizabeth," Patricia said during their buzz conversation. "My great-grandmother acclimated to say that Elizabeth had approved to advice Bolt a bad man, but got in agitation for it. I never knew if it was true." Patricia Catholic to Hartford to see the account and apprentice about her ancestor's story. Continuing in the absolute society, attractive at Elizabeth's photograph with new understanding, she wiped abroad tears. She was so young, Patricia whispered, but she was aggravating to do the adapted thing, alike aback it put her in danger. Sarah abiding for the account to be appropriately preserved and displayed at the Hartford History Building with a applique cogent Elizabeth's complete story. The display would ensure that visitors accepted both the absolute ambience of Aboriginal 20th Aeon cyberbanking, artifice, and the claimed adventuresomeness of one adolescent, woman who banned to abide bashful about corruption. Sarah looked at Elizabeth's account one final time before it was confused to the museum. She marveled at how one woman's atrocious message, hidden in apparent afterimage for over a century, had assuredly appeared the truth. Elizabeth's smile, already a mystery, now stood as an attestation to her bravery. A admonition that sometimes the best accustomed photographs authority, the best amazing stories, cat and mouse for addition accommodating to attending anxiously abundant to see what others had missed. Elizabeth's bequest lived on, her adventure assuredly told, her adventuresomeness assuredly recognized,